In English, on page number 11, I take refuge in the Guru, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. From now until my enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and by the merit great in this practice, may I attain the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful happiness. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, feel bias, attachment, and anger. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, encircled by the four continents, surmounted by the sun and the moon, I visualize this Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy the pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mendala Kame Yadaya.
야, 그리고 대롱달 로마 돈지라 동복 공장을 가지고 정말 사바다스들이 어쩌네 지금 로마 송전에 모두 나가서 왔던데 지금 로마 근인 설명 살았지 돈지네는 로아스 수스탐 지다나 나타 나임도 집에 내 직접동 나타 돈지 시송다 지금
Good morning to you all, and thank you for joining me here in the Southern space and for today's practice and discussion. And before today's discussion, and I would like to ask you to join me a brief meditation on my reciting Aryan Tara's mantra. And as we did before, while you are reciting the Ariyanara's mantra and to make sure you and try to meditate on Ariyanara's glorious sacred image, and in the meanwhile, think of the power, the blessings, and the compassion, wisdoms of Ariyanara, and transform it into the form of light, and the light radiates out and reach the interactions and sentient beings, and particularly help those who are suffered by the COVID-19 pandemic, and those who are suffered feel stressed or pain in any caused by any other forms of the negative negativities also, and reciting Ariyanara's mantra and meditate the same way. So that's what I start with the discussion.
So ye jalara do dare do so do dare do so dare do dare so dare do so dare Dare du dare dare so yewali nyulu da jizun ruma lowa jija malu bada saba ko barsho semje ne ba jinye ba nido ne le ruwe ne ne malu bata do chungwa me barsho menam tu da temba da sanga de jo khando symbol so ba nyingje sem da de jur ji sende
다 같은 아주 오범 제 이마 이건 로디네 기타 아주 다 아무도 사회 에너지 차등 회사가 제로도 나라 뭐니 거라 나세 당복 자원지리 때라테니 나라 주 펜토사텔라 작바당 소소 마가사텔라 당과지 에무리나 사회에는 나세한테 자천보지도 나라도 삼아 지 요때 간다지 요레지 저저는 아주 삼에때 렌로 다다도 나세데 거 요레지나 optical 지 많이 버지 요다 그래서 딱 나세한테 자니 손리 스토네 지 다 리섬 이거 그런 라테 데비지 다 점지 봐도 얘기요 말 그래서 다 아주 리게 땅 라테는 저땅 안에 미카시 나 거요 요즘 라송 뭐 라마 창치네 나 되었어 그거 그래서 다 리게 땅에 자나 같은 아주 섬당 리게 땅 앞에 당보 리트 삼로 땅에 밀리 세드 삼로 땅에 고 근데 아니 때때는 리트 땅을 라파 냠버도 상네 아니 자금지네 삼로 좀 마다 리코랑 거나 삼로 땅치네 리트 당보 가와니 좀서 타마 간다 착거든 당보 배 파미 같은 거 클리니 우드니야 토니용네 타마 동비 양라파 탈라 로드 메긴 나가 사르고는 사게나 팀로는 동비 양라 쳔로라 그래서 리시 리경오들 차다 나 내사게 리경오데 된자다 나타나 나 미인세게 망도즈도 밀리티 텔라들 종아리 된자다 데 삼로고 땅에나 땅치 된자다 아로 리디 고고 요랑 리들 샤오모 시트고 리들라 가르치고즈나 조지시모나 리라 트윈드 시시 네 배조당 거서 리드 나롱 남지 리드가 요거지네 리드라 잠깐만서 리드 조금만서 배지 무슨 소바로 지 같이 띠 처음마다 잠깐만서 조금만서 다 고고다 띠 맞춰라 배다다 사지나 지다 시보로 공치보로 본지나 공치보 야가로 지 쇼지기네 다뜨게 다 만당 마스라 다뜨게 다배 그 리코랑 요거지기 다 리코랑 리 습지가 리기 요거지네 되네 기초 정도고 조나인 리텔라 저쪽에 제티지나 때야 요거치니 또 저거 내가 진짜 내가 말고 그렇게 지 같이 진지병 담아 아주 카드도 그래서 리세텔라 리텔라 배주 요거 당 거를 아주 단단 미 리세도 뭐 다쳐고 톱도 때네 같이네 배주 요거 당 거를 어떻게 거든요 그 거든 어떻지네 대신에 리강라 자네 리테 삼노다에 요코당지리 아니 리탄도 nga mani paila tene sem gitang sam노당 다 셈세데 간르즈나 셈 getang sem korong sarik chadiro 어떻지네 또 저다네 니마
Kamaji, dito kamaji gua.
네
Zila.
보고 하고 또
Okay, my apologies.
있지
I mute myself. All right. Let's continue. Talk about and how to practice meditation. And last time, if you recall, and I talked about or was trying to share some basic for the general instructions on the meditation. And so today I'd like to finish up with it. Essentially, I was trying to share my understanding of meditation, and basically, I meditate on the body and or use the body as the base of the meditation, or the object, the meditative of the object of meditative concentration, and the mind. So the reason why we needed to meditate on practice two types of meditation, and analytically, then and then stabilize it, the analytical meditation, right? So it's because the cause of our suffering, minor or major, whatever you experience, essentially can be tracked down, or is a result in the misperception of self, I. So your sense of I are our basic sense of I prior to analytical meditation, prior to the critical analytical meditation, and so we have this sense of I. That sense of I is the source, the cause of all the suffering. Why? Because and this sense of I will give us apparently two experiences, emotional experience. One is attached to pleasure of play. So you feel pleasure, you feel enjoyable, you feel something nice and good, and you attach to it. So then that triggers, or that invites all the problems and afterwards. And then another way you experience the emotionally pain, and because of this sense of disperception of I, and it's because of the anger or the hatred and the frustrations and the disappointment and so on and so forth. Essentially, it's an aversion. So your sense of I is a cause of trouble, all the problems, because of these two emotional experiences: attachment, attached to the pleasurable thing, and the rejecting or dislike or hate the painful or unpleasurable, unpleasant experience. So for that very reason, right, we needed to work on this I, that try to address the root cause of the problem at its root level. So then this requires the analytical meditation. So how this idea of I come from, right? Where we get this sense of I. When you ask this question, you will find out essentially when you say I, most likely in general, you will point out your body. Your body is the base, is the object, or is the foundation, is the reason for you to make the claim, say I, right? Or a certain something I, and thereby, you consider I is so precious and so critical and so important. But here, if we apply the Buddhist analytical wisdom that understands the ultimate reality, right? And when we apply the wisdom and analytically put it into the process of analytical meditation, we try to find that I, that precious I, that very critical I, that great I, and we just can't find it, right? We just can't find it. So-called I, and if you closely analyze, you will see the very claim you make I either based upon your sense of or your actually is your projection of the idea of I based upon the body, or the sense of your body.
your physical that entity, the structure, the body. So you call I, or you name it I, and then you claim I. That's so the idea of I come from body, firstly, and secondly, also in the idea of I is something is a mental, and something is conscious, and something is about the mind. So you call say I or me is because you use the I, use the mind, and you use the conscious, or use this mental phenomena, mental activity as the base or reason, and so then you claim establish your I-ness or your self-good. But both of them, and ultimately, is the mental projection, is the production of your label, the mental label, the process of the mental labeling. Okay, so for that reason, let's say, and so you are we needed to looking for that I first of all by searching the I throughout your body, right? And we started with the I, and then the body say where the bodies come from, right? If your body is your eye or the base of your eye, then that eyes come from where? And of course, we track all the way to the end, and we know that the very eye or the very body, which is serve as the base of your eye, in the sense of eye, is come from the mother's egg and the father's sperm, right? And then we know that the process of growing or development, right, all the way until up until the moment you're born, and then you're growing, and right, and you become adult, and then you aging, and you die, and after you die, your body and the of course this physical entity or physical structure, right, and as constituted by the all the material, the forms of material will become a dust, right, dust or particles, and whatever is substance, and then those dust or substance and ashes will dissolve into this infinite empty space, right? And then so completely gone. And and then there is no really the I, right? But only left. What I left is the name of the I, right? That's just a term. It's a term, just a notion. So, and then you know that, so-called body, right? So-called I is based upon the body, and come from the name, through the name and the labeling, process labeling the body. But the body itself, when you go through all this thing and analytically, you see the body itself is not ultimately, and does not exist objectively or by itself, or does not exist autonomously at all. Okay, so here I make a pause. Let's say that even though body and ultimately is such a sort of illusionary thing, right? But that doesn't mean body has no value, has no use. It's the opposite. Our human body, especially, it has a greater value. It's very important and very, very useful. So it is up unto us, or we are the one has to recognize this greater usefulness or the greater value and of the body, and let the body do something meaningful, and give it a meaningful and a task to the body. Let the body work for us. Something is greater, and something is ultimate, something is important. Right? If we do not let give the body and an important task, a valuable, a meaningful task, then what do? We generally speaking, we will become the slaver of our body. We try to feed the body, we try to protect it from the heat, and try to protect it from the cold, we try to not let it get fatigue or experience any harm, right? We try to buy most expensive clothes and the jewelries, right, and decorate it, and we try to make it in a good shape, right, and in the best sort of way we like. But what all this suggests, right? If you questioning about what you're doing and busy doing for all this to your body, essentially you are acting like the servant of your own body, right? You're not really use it for something is greater, something is meaningful, but rather you just try to get it, try to do the best for that body's needs. Right. This, of course, is spiritually speaking, is meaningless. Why? Because it doesn't matter how hard you train your body and how well you protect it, how much you love your body. You cannot develop your body and from a good to better and the best, right? And it will eventually will aging, will diminish, and will get and show its own real entity, meaning that you can never really develop the body into something that's infinite, become an infinite quality, or become the quality that is infinite. And so therefore, we must properly use our body. And like the Shanchideva said in the Avatar and Avatar, Bodhisattva Avatar, and so so it is important we get this rare opportunity, get it, and this precious body, and so now we must use it and like the boat, right? The boat and cross the ocean and cross the ocean of samsara or the cyclic existence and reach the off the shore of the nirvana or the ultimate happiness. So that's how we analytically and practice analytical meditation and track down or find out and the falsehood of our I, the misperception of self, which is based upon the understanding or the knowledge of our body. Right, that's the first thing. And the first sort of meditation, or first way to find I in the best through the analytical meditation, meditate on the body, or by defined in the I from your body, with your body. And then, so secondly, we can move on to the searching for I by looking the I into from the mind or the consciousness or the mental phenomena. Before I talk about how to practice analytical meditation, and as a means to search for the or to fully realize realize to understand the falsehood of I that you established based upon the mind or your sense of mind. Let me say a few words more about the body, and, or in other words, as addition, something in addition to what we have discussed about the analytical meditation, and as a means, use the body as the object of meditation, analytical meditation, and the object of the analytical meditation to understand the falsehood, the falseness of the I. So Buddha at one point said that our body is impermanence because it changes momentarily, and our body and also conventionally it's not pure or not clean. We know that as a fact, right? Because after all, when you look at all the components or each part of it, external, internal, right? And so you go through the process of the structures of our body. There's no single pieces you can even conventionally you can consider it's pure and all clean. And of course, there's no I, the solid, conquered, right? Absolute and self, and within that I, within that body, or live inside the body, just can't find it, right? And why? Again, as I said, it is impermanent. It is impermanent because it changes and it's moment by moment, right? Without a cease, a moment of a pause, and also that our body is not a separate entity, right? And it's like I say, so my body. It seems that objectively there and independently there, sort of operating under its own power, and it's established sort of by itself, right? And or inherently sort of established, which all these are false. There's no such a thing at all, right? For that reason, that so if the base itself does not inherently exist, it's devoid of such a quality, and that's how they appear to us, how we feel it, right? So it does not objectively and existed and by itself or real and operating under its own power, and so the base itself is devoid of such a quality. Then the I, so you superimpose, right, and you projecting, you sort of try to put it upon and there, right, and you try to establish. Obviously, you cannot, and there's no since there's no base to hold such a identity and such a phenomena called identity, right, and self. Then obviously there's no I in this case. But having said that, we must always pay close attention. And when we say no I, right, so we have to remember this selflessness, right, or no I, or not a self, and or anatma. All this are basically is we are discussing this and we define this is from the ultimate point of view, right? In other words, there's two truths, right? Conventional truth and ultimate truth. From a conventional ultimate point of view, ultimate reality point of view, yes, so-called I and self and individuality, all of them are does not exist the way how it appears in in your mind in general. No, that's reality. Okay? But this reality is ultimate reality. Right? However, when we turn our attention to the conventional aspect of our life, right, or reality, that's the conventional truth, right, or relative truth, right, relatively or conventionally, right, and we just right, without apply a critical analysis, we know that our feelings, our mental appearance, and our senses are there. You cannot deny your basic senses, right? You cannot deny your mental appearance, the things that appear into you mentally, right? But those things are, remember, it's conventional truth, right? So therefore, when you meditate on this selflessness, right, or the selflessness of person, remember that, and you must carefully, right, define, right, this selflessness of a person, right, in the context of the conventional self, right, the basic sense of self, or general appearance of the self. You must know the difference, the distinctions between those two, and yeah. So then, and there are works that need to be carefully done, and when you meditate on the selflessness of person.
아주 리슨 요리 제가 나서 도사 코너 지 코너 요 말때 저다 다 섬지 땅도 저 섬지 땅에 저 좋아하는 섬지 땅에 아니 초용도 섬지 강에 안데 지 원봉하고 일디 땅도 넘버 시와 나때 텔라테네 리지 땅도 서로 데들라서 거 참아 이거 섬지 좋아지로 섬지 뜻이로 어텔라테네 드시세데 어등이데 더 코르세 등이 지레세 나즈비즈 버트 참아 섬지 뜻이 장듯이 용거 다 샘때 되지 용거를 샘지 트능으로 나와나 논년을 봤다니 용도 샘지 나와용도 버티 자리용으로 아니 그 먹고 지게 통을 먹고 남을 시와티 지게 통을 집에 아니 그때 먹고 지게 통을 셔발라 그 잡을 숨상 거죠 하쇼다 일 지나 먹고 원보라 따기는 하쇼 일 원보 요하지 때는 이 원보 요하 가지고만 스스로 먹고 원보다 땐 먹을라 겨매 봐 먹을라 겨매 봐 좀 많이 봐 먹고 남을 시와텔라 싸울지도 시비고네 아니 섬자 통나 아니 올도 지고네 망고 총용을 쏘는 가지고 뭐 지금 망하는 걸 아주 몰라 원보 나와도 정말 망고 소비 공내 나와도 그런 가지고 일기 땅나 원보 매소나 저 된로도 맞잖아 나도 요 말에 물은 때나 물라 견지 뭐가 원보라 견지 정나 나도 요 말에 무게 남을 시와고 단통에 손을 뻗는 것도 보여 말 배다 무게 잠바질라 섬 차도나 디섬 디샬로로스는 무게 단다 무게 원부 통통고 그래서 정말 통용을 줬더니 데 원보래 되는 원보 통송을 다주 지역의 섬지 무게 원보 무게 남을 시위도 이게 남을 시월 티지 이게 남을 시위 다주 지역이거든 그래서 다마 대종을 있다 샘대 양배 서리크 차점 지용 때 망보드 때린 종용을 써도 샘 로즈지 샘때 간다지리 샘때 자소는 샘때 메타와라 제자다 로코라지도 맞아 로드도 지당지나 로세 용어로 로델레 때니 살로올라 타나 자우 주도 정고한테 정고처럼 그러네 로세데 간다지나 로세 니와 잡도도 오늘 전에 무슨 얘기가 뭐 봐. 그래서 샘세데 때지 기동 리스무 니와로 주네 당마도 미텐도 시올소 미리텐데 미즈네 마트 참거 이나더니 럼베름비 깨치까지는 지금 집에 인트 맞나 진짜 근데 시송랑 아주 남르시 인데 카트네 리당 카트네 일 잠바지글에 모두 올 시즌은 요 잠비 모드로 걸 그래서 안에 어디 샘그 삼로 당도다 샘그 당네 자리 나세 샘그 당네 들문도 어떻게 잡고
누군가한테 시선을 가려고
시송에 나 가지고 리틀 당 샘도 카트를 오라. 카트나 아니 리스ම් 유드 카트 용소 아니 샘대야 로진지 네버 드비데 샘파 카트 소 말해. 샘 그때디 딱비 샘 인지파 모전 들어서 그랬어. 모전 들이 니와도 전체를 지송나 대지 잡아쳐도 배당하고 로도 치고. 로 잘로도 제나 로지나 잘로지나 자 도저 장로지나 장로지 장로천도 어때 당신 니와로 들으시겠다. 니와트 파자리 손 니와트 아주 어때다 샘 니와 들으실 때 아청카레 고주です.
So yes, we're looking for the self. Again, there's two ways you can establish your self or some kind of I or individuality. One is based upon the body, and because of body, that's something that appears to you, right? Something that's kind of obvious to you, and that's mostly is a body. But just like we discussed before, when you examine, searching that very I, and which you name it after, and in your body and throughout your body, and then you can't just find it. Similarly, in like the mind, or your consciousness, and so when you generally prior to analytical meditation and the practice of the analytical meditation, you might feel, think, and a certain claim, and or make some kind of statements about I, and so because here your mind or your consciousness and somehow is sort of suggest or provide some kind of evidence and to support your claim, and so sort of show you there is such a thing called I, right? And but in any case, that's so-called I, and the either based upon the body or the mind. We can't find the third category. There's no third thing, and for you to claim I, right? Or use as the base of the your I selfhood or the I-ness. There's no such thing. So now let's back to the mind. The consciousness of our mind is another base, or the foundation, or the reason, and we claim I, or we come up with the idea of the I. But its consciousness itself is again, when you analytically looking that very I, right, where you believed is there or ultimately operating as a self, and in your mind, you will find that that's not the case. Why? Because we have these five senses, right? Just say the mind from the sense point of view. We have senses, right? Like the eye and the ear and the nose and the tongue and so on and so forth. Those five senses. Let's just say these eye, the senses of eye, right? Your eye sense essentially in the it's which part of the by the way, it's the function of your the sense of your eye is the function of your mind, right? Just like the feelings of your body, right? You feel this way, you feel that way, but the feeling, even though you feel at the sensational level, sense level, you feel at the body, and at the body, in your body, but essentially come from the mind. So the mind is the source, mind is the origin, right, and of the basic foundations of your understanding, your senses, right? So so all those five senses and for the consciousness and at the physical level, and essentially is come from the, something that's we call the consciousness, or which is formless, and so in other words, and whatever you claim or you feel, and through your physical and physically, and which basically is the tricks of the mind, or it is a sort of a play of your consciousness. Okay? So the things and the feelings and the senses you get essentially is it's like it's the manifestation of your own mind. It's which just like the movie, right? And so we know that how the movie goes, right? And so essentially, which on the film, but and all the actings and the materials, right, and the data is being registered or recorded, printed on the negative, right, and some form of sort of film. And but when they're projected, right, you don't see that. Instead, you see that it's external, is out there by itself, right? So the legitimacy or the validity of this sense data, or the knowledges you gain through the senses, and again, under the analogical meditation, it's become questionable. It's not valid, or it's not reliable, as generally it's how it's sort of conform itself is objectively and permanently sort of ultimate. It's not. Why? Because here's the example. We depend on rely on our vision and our eye sense, right? The sense of eye, and then looking into and seeking for and doing the things based upon our eye sense, very visually. But this sense of eye visually, and when looking, actually it's not really operating by itself. It depends upon three critical conditions, right? Those three conditions has to be present. Otherwise, you can't get the sense that eye data and establish any knowledge through the eye, the sense through the eyes. Here, the three things has to be involved in order to get the correct information. For example, like blue, right? So, oh, that thing is blue. This knowledge of blue, first of all, has to depend on the faculty of our eye, right? The faculties of eye, and then secondly, the consciousness of the eye, right? And then the object of the blue, right? So the blue, the faculty, and the eye faculty, and the consciousness of the eye. So those three things has to be present. Right? For example, if you got this eye conscious, the faculty as eye, like a pupil and or any part of your eye organ, right? If decay or has any trouble, right? Any problem. And so the sense data that you got about blue will be not accurate, right? It will be problematic, right? If you severely damaged the eye organ, then is severely damaged, or has any kind of a medical condition, medically troubled, and then you, for example, like Lam, you just can't see it, right? Even blue is there, you can't see it, right? And or if you have something kind of consciously not stable, right? Your consciously is not as stable, and then your sense of the blue is cannot be accurate, right? And similarly, if the object itself has some kind of trouble, then you cannot really come to the idea of clear, correct, conventionally speaking, correct understanding of or knowledge of I see the blue. You can't form that knowledge. So therefore, see, but that's not how occur to us, right? Generally, we don't see ourselves, and when we understand the blue or develop the sense of blue, for us, it's just straight, right, single process and one simple thing that is blue, right? We never really noticed how heavily we depend upon our the sense organ, right? Depend on the stability or the conditions of our consciousness and that object we call the blue, right? So, and here is the thing again. So when you see that this mind, right, and so mind is the what is the mind, right? Mind is again is something that's not as the objectively sort of existed or separate entity like we claim and say in my mind or I think so. That's how you make you proclaim that I, right, or selfhood or the individuality. But what is I really? And we looking into and so everything is with anything within that thing which we call I, is that a separated entity or ultimately and objectively sort of operating under itself is there, and in fact you can't really find such a thing in the mind, and because mind does not exist the way how it appears to you in general. So the mind is kind of looking, when you're looking down every aspect of the mind and the functionality of the mind, you come kind of closer to the point. Mind actually is a kind of energy, right? It's a form of a sort of energy, and it's like the electricity. It's like electricity. It functions, it works, right? But how it works, right? There's no really a clear and a way for you to define this is what that is. You can't do that. For example, generally speaking, the electricity, the power we use, right, in our daily life, and so like in our house, right? When the house is getting cold, we turn the electricity adjust to the heat mode, right? Then that very electricity and make it heating, heat our house, right? Make the house warm. So it's transformed to give us a sense of warm. So it become a heat, right? It turned to heat. But when it is hot, right, then we switch to the cold mode or air condition, right, and heating, right? And not heating, the cold mode. Then that very electricity which coming from the powerhouse into our house, now it's become a heating or become the cooling. So heating and cooling is two different things, but it comes from one source, that is electricity, right? And similarly, and so the mind essentially is some form of power or some form of energy, but this very energy or this very power, it's changeable, right? It changes from moment to moment. Right? Again, there's no really single moment. There's the mind pause, right? But rather it changes all the time and momentarily. It changes, right? But its continuation, the continuum of it itself, the mind, it's remain in the sense of again this. So from the previous moment to present moment, and they go on to next moment, and they go on and forth, and so on and so forth. And it's never is sort of as far as the functionality concerned, it never loses, right? It never loses. And so then when we reach the point where the life ends, like a death, right? But death occurs, the separation of body and the yourself is made, right? and then the present mind and you also been made. The separation has been made, right? But this then when we left it after we left the body, right? What we left is what continues is the continuation of or the continuity of our consciousness. That very continuation of the mind, remember, is not inherently existent. It's not something that's real or absolute. Right? It's a dependent origination. It's a dependently established, a dependently arise. Right? So that's what when you look in the mind, think about the mind, and or you try to understand the individuality and that you hold on to, and because there is a base for you to claim, right? And that's his mind. So when you're looking into critically analyzes the real entity and the conditions and nature of the mind, and you end up that the mind is not as does not exist the way how it generally appears to you. So therefore, that's also proof that the I, the self that you and cherished so much, and you attach so much, and basically it's a base. In this case, is mind. The self does not exist in hand.
대리면 다 교과 교 컨트리 디와점 드브진 다 컨트리 스드가 저도 멤버 뜻세고라 대트랑 가도 교세데 나세데 간다지레 이 삼로 당자네 아니 지금 사례 철에 농래 남칼 남시리 지레 이 삼로 당네 정아도 검자데 그거면 자금인데 자금 전에 까마 저 검자다네 뒤지고들라 저틀 좀
그래서 그거데 나제 지부제데 섬데 지금 거라고 나 지부 승송소 제가
나세 dakse 지로라 뜻다 바로 소망 바로 소망 줘라 내가 지금 나세 dakse 직발 맞대 지지 대 삼도 보통 때는 애니 또 직발이 나면 컨트롤 점바테 진짜 사례 처리 메일 동래 아주 방법 하나요나 사치면 종합 공부 정보 다 때문에 남카레 남시리 다 스텝이 공부 때니 가만히나 다 나세 거 자리 많이 봐 동비영 지션 때라 삼도때 당치네 아니 교 컴퓨터 디비스 다 자니 나세 매총을 자니 매총 때문에 로나로지 때 말해 다 촉섬라 때니 딱비 딱지 장거리 다 뜻이 뭐다 요금자이
So let me say a few words, and then we practice meditation, analytical meditation. And I would like to encourage you to practice analytical meditation for about 10 minutes, and then we start a question and answer session. Before that, let me offer you some suggestions. Okay? So just for you to practice it, apply it in your meditation, and in the following the meditation after this discussion. How you analytically try to define I, and then reach the point where you truly understand the fallacy, or understand the point where you missed or you misidentify, right? The point where you mistakenly thought that was you or I, and actually it's not. How you reach this point? to begin with that, I think that in Tibetan we have 3 words called nga, which is I, and the da is self, and jibu is a person. Right? I, person, and self. So those are things and a synonym in Tibetan language. But each of them sort of represents a different or carries the different call it offer refer to something that a different aspect of the one thing. So in your analytical meditation, first of all, right, to have a clear sense of I or the thoughts of I, right, and then look at that I, right, identify the I, how it's the sort of the traits, right, the characteristic of that I. And then also, then move on, say the self, right? What is the self? The trait, characteristic, right? So it's a representation and the I, a self. And then the person, right? A person, you as a person, what does that mean, right? How it really appears to you, how it looks like, right? And your sense of that person. So look at those 3 things and see whether they are something that's a kind of exist by itself or independently, right? And so the way you look in and so see the self is how self or I or person, and so they are dependent upon something else, right? And you end up dependent upon something else. The thing is, in the case of physical body, right? The physical body involved with the earth, which is your right, and the bodily muscles, right, bones, and then so the body again is not really body itself, but it's the the other element that is a fire other than earth, right? Fire, which is bodily heat, and then the water, which is the bodily fluids, right? And then you see this bodily the space inside the body, right? And then the wind and the wind. So all those are so if you the self I person is related to or depend upon then the body are dependent on the fire, earth, the water, wind, and the inner space, right? And so the base itself you got lost, correct? The very foundation or the base which you established the solid concrete self is become invalid or unreliable or not true. And but again, when you reach this point, and remember, we are not to talk about the very purpose of searching for the I, right? And is not to become a nihilist, right? Nihilist, or someone who denial the everything, right? Or make the things to say there's no difference between the form of the rabbit and all the phenomena, right? So this so-called our finding of the I must not reach to the point say there's no difference between the I and the horn of the rabbit. Horn of the rabbit is example, right? And the analogy that said that there's no such a thing on the head of a rabbit there's a horn, right? There's no such a thing. That means there's absolute nothingness, right? None. And so our searching for I must not end up in such a trap, okay? And this is the very critical point you have to remember. Rather, you should your analytical meditation and in terms of searching for the true self, the identity of self, right, must be end up say, oh, I a self, a person, after all, is the production of the production of mental labeling, right? So I, self, a person, after all, is the mental projection, is a mere term, a mere name. That's one.
Oh yeah. That's the gomje. Alu kamanga gomje ne trot. Kamanga to.
So I think that we only have instead of 10 minutes, we only have 5 minutes. And then after that, I'm going to open the floor and let you ask questions.
Oh yeah. That's the gomje jugo. 노동 때문에 지금 인도는 삼 때문에 요구를 지금 요새는 좋아하려나 한번 같이 또 상승을 할까 좋아 같이 되나 좀 그러면 안 돼.
So what I just said today, and then that's, I believe, is basic two forms of the meditation, right? And so I hope you can apply this knowledge and in your daily practice. And now, do you have any questions? Even though I think time is we reached our schedule, end of time. But if you have questions, please ask.
Question. I have a question, Geishla. If death is the separation of mind and body, then what happens to mind and death?
Shivasya kasi zukutang ta lisaniga kateba la chanjo tebay na chisong se na lisan ni kaka teba de la chiwa chanjo tebay na samti karjo ta li jam jan ja wa da ma chuan do samti karjo
제동 치와세들라 샤탕로다 다다 가조 제동 진기 장토라 우리 샤탕냐 치와세 롱 그라서는 치송라 이나 제동은 넘버 용리 샤르 리슴 카트 리슴 최송의 우리 최송나 리슴 카트 요요 말 제타 뛰는 거 남시티야 진이 아주 나니 타동하다 샴네 지 땅때리 도야요 일단 남시 카트네 리비도 용주 냠도 걸 처럼도 지되지네 카트 정말 저마 답안이 지금 갑자기나 따라네 지금 기와는 로그 마토젠 파르도 또 다 파르도 니마가 쓰는 데데 기와지 발롱 그런 거지.
Okay. So the separation of the body and the mind, which is considered the death, or the actual the occurrence of the death, is one way to understand it about death. But in fact, there's another way to see death. Death can be also defined. That is the clear cut off the breath. When the process of the continuation of the breath be clearly cut off, right, or broken, right? The link of the continuity of the breath is cut off, then that also the death is occurred after. And so what here we needed to know is that in Buddhism, we say the body and the mind is separate. But this is the separation of the body and the mind has to be again very carefully examined. And so not all in all the cases that the clear cut off or the broken, right, the streams of the broken of the stream of a breath is occur. Like you can taste, you can see that the person is no longer breathing at all, right? But that's does not necessarily mean the person is really dead. Why? Because the person's body and the heat won't still keep it, right? And so in the subtle level, the consciousness still remain and functioning, right? Until, again, this is from Buddhist point of view, when you see that person, he or she is not moving at all, and the bodily activities completely cease, and so the breath is completely cut off, but he or she still may remain. And so the separation of body and mind is still not occur. reached the final phase, the final point. So the way to define whether the final point of death, the separate body and the mind, which is death, generally speaking, is occurred or not, and there's several signs, and you can see. One of the signs is that after the breath is cut off for a while, and it depends on the individual cases. So one sign is that you see the blood or substance come from the person's nostril. Right. That's the one sign shows that and also the down the bottom of your body also some substance may you see, and some stuff may comes out from your body. So either it's nostril or down below your bottom, and so those signs occur. That means the death, the person reaches the final separation of body and the mind. Right? And now, to directly answer your question about what happened with the mind, so mind, and at this point is as two things can be happen. One is it depends on the individual practitioner and its levels of his or her spiritual practice, and so those advanced practitioner in the soon after the separation of mind and body occur, and then he or she will instantly reborn in the pure form of in the good rebirth again. And but for those lower level practitioner and or the person practitioner of the person in general, and has no control whatsoever with its own mind, then he or she, after the separation of the last moment of separation of body and mind occur, he or she and enter into what we call the intermediate stage, or the bardo. The stage of bardo, right? And then has to go through the process of the bardo, then to regain the form of the life.
단단 가서 차통 들리던 제통 가서 ዝ고 니와도 빼디 쇼 냠소나 때 용토 말씀. 그때 그리고 쇼들이 니와 많이 받는 제통 평가가 아주 몸이 사원로 때가 내다때 같이 용을 줬대. 탁도 미랑진 바야통 걸 들리때 치랑진 더 마통 걸 그때 시고 그거는 시고 다때 제통을 시작하고 다 그런 가져왔습니다.
Yeah. So maybe we just end up here.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we'll say closing prayer. We'll say the Lam Rim prayer on page number 80.
Rangi Jejen Tobi Lanje Shira Zivi Tongyi Janje Jove Ye Base Yahweh Damba Yuron Zenjur Damba Renjen Chodi Macha Cha Chanyam Bejurve Chode Nyang Jen Bo Yahweh Baram De Jong Lam Zan De Be Dun Jen De Xi Kan Jen Se Xi Ne Dang Me Me Ce Ro Gong Do Yahweh Ma Nam Da Lam Dang Jawer Ma Kan Se De Ba Cho La Cho Zhe Se Zhe De La Zong Ba Di De Den An Jie Dan De Zhong Xi Zha Xi Zhang Zong Chu Gun Chang Zhe Jie Ba Den Za Wei La Ma Ren Bo Xie Dan Jie Yin Ba Ba Mi Den Shan La Ba Den Jie Bo Wu Ji Zhi Song De Ku Song Tu Jie Ngo Zhuo Za De Su Tu Sen Qiu Ren Bo Xie Ba Xie De Ji De Zhi De Wa Me Ba Yang Kong Ne Gong De Bei Er Xiu Kang Ren Ra Wei Ku Wei Shang Zi Ban Dong De Wa Ma De Ai Lian San Wa Dian Zhen Jia Zu Ye Xia Bei Sen De Wa De Dan Ji Re Ji Jia Ba Ba Wo Jie De La Jian Ba Dang Gong Du Sang Bo De Yang De Xian De De Da Ji Ji Si Dang Bo Shi Ge Wa De Da Dang Jie Ren De Ngo De San Wei Jia Wa Dang Jie Jia Ngo Wa Dang Zu De Fa Ba De Dang Xian Ji Wei Za Wa De Gong Jia Sang Bo Zhi我儿姐本地兄弟担保的生意，并且给我当局不光让自己很大的是因为上街担保导致一直机会才是跟着要我中高位他做新能的是在别的因为嘛在路上的年人给就这样都不嘛就是去老说这是来什么了啊
Thank you for you all and all the best to you all.
我们这个的话也不是有什么呀当咱的我们这个的话有
It is my hope that you come, you practice meditation, which we taught today, and come up with a clear idea about I.
你等等，我真的你根本这个我没有真的，当时都没这个么这个钱的，个天的。
In my case, and personally, I just can't find that absolute I or myself. However, it's just very difficult for me to make a clear cut of the clear cut with attachment to the self. One of the modern great Tibetan Buddhist scholar, his name is Günden Chimpe. So Günden Chimpe at one point said, even though the so-called self is unfoundable, right? Unfoundable, but when you touch with the needle with your own finger, and you will feel pain. So at that point, so as soon as the needle, the pick of needle, and the pinch your finger, and you will say, "Ouch, my!" You will cry out, and they show something. Yeah.
Thank you.